The transport shuttle's engines hummed to silence as Dr. Marcus Chen pressed his palm against the reinforced viewport, watching the crystalline spires of the ethereal settlement pierce the horizon of Kepler 442b. 3 months of hyperspace travel had brought him to this moment, humanity's first attempt at meaningful communication with an alien species that had, until now, regarded them with the same scientific detachment one might show laboratory specimens. "Magnificent, isn't it, Commander?" Hayes joined him at the observation deck, his weathered face reflecting the planet's twin suns. The xenobiology team estimates their civilization is at least 5,000 years older than ours, yet they've shown no interest in expansion or conquest. Pure logic-based society, they say. Marcus nodded, adjusting the neural translation interface behind his ear. 6 years of studying fragmented ethereal communications had prepared him for this assignment, but nothing could truly ready someone for face-to-face contact with beings who viewed emotion as an evolutionary flaw. The research station buzzed with activity as Marcus reviewed his mission parameters one final time. Establish basic communication protocols. Document their social structures. Most importantly, determine whether meaningful diplomatic relations were possible between species as fundamentally different as warm-blooded humans and crystalline-based ethereals. His first glimpse of Keeper Zilvana came through the station's main viewport. The ethereal female, if gender even applied to their species, stood nearly 7 feet tall, her translucent skin catching and refracting light in prismatic patterns. 2 arms, 2 legs, perfectly humanoid proportions, yet utterly alien in the way she moved with calculated precision, each step deliberate and efficient. Dr. Chen, the translation device rendered Zilvana's harmonic tones into crisp English. I am designated as your primary contact for this cultural exchange. I have been instructed to observe and catalog human behavioral patterns while facilitating your study of our civilization. Marcus extended his hand in greeting, then quickly withdrew it when Zilvana's violet eyes fixed on the gesture with scientific curiosity rather than social recognition. It's an honor to meet you, Keeper Zilvana. I hope we can learn much from each other. Indeed. Though I confess your species' reliance on physical contact for communication appears highly inefficient. Skin-to-skin contact serves no logical purpose in information transfer. Zilvana tilted her head, studying Marcus's face with the intensity of a researcher examining a new specimen. Your facial muscles contract in specific patterns. Is this an involuntary stress response? I'm smiling, Marcus explained, fighting to keep his expression neutral. It's a way humans show friendliness or happiness. Happiness. Zilvana repeated the word as if tasting something foreign. A biochemical state that clouds rational judgment. We eliminated such inefficiencies from our genetics approximately 3 millennia ago. Their first formal session took place in a sterile conference room, with Marcus seated across from the ethereal delegation. Zilvana served as primary interpreter, her crystalline features remaining impassive as Marcus demonstrated basic human customs, handshakes, waves, expressions of gratitude. Your species exhibits numerous redundant behaviors, Zilvana observed, her voice carrying no judgment, merely fact. Multiple methods of acknowledgement, varied facial expressions conveying similar information states, physical gestures that serve no practical function. From an efficiency standpoint, these behaviors represent significant energy waste. Perhaps, Marcus replied carefully, but they serve purposes beyond mere information transfer. They create bonds between individuals, establish trust, provide comfort during difficult times. Bonds. The word seemed to puzzle Zilvana more than any linguistic complexity they'd encountered. You refer to emotional attachment. We observed this phenomenon in your preliminary transmissions. Humans appearing to derive satisfaction from proximity to specific individuals, exhibiting distress when separated. Such dependencies would be considered severe psychological dysfunction among my people. As their first day concluded, Marcus watched Zilvana's departure with growing fascination. The ethereal moved with liquid grace, yet there was something almost lonely about her perfect efficiency. For a species that had eliminated emotional need, Silvana seemed remarkably interested in understanding what she'd dismissed as human weakness. That night, Marcus reviewed the day's recordings, noting how Silvana's luminescent skin had shifted to deeper blues during discussions of human bonding, and how her perfectly composed features had betrayed the slightest hint of confusion when Marcus had laughed spontaneously at a translation error. Perhaps their differences weren't as insurmountable as everyone believed. 3 weeks into their cultural exchange, Marcus had established a routine that felt almost normal, if one could call daily conversations with a 7-foot crystalline being about the fundamental nature of human existence normal. Silvana arrived, each morning at precisely 800 hours, her iridescent skin catching the artificial sunlight streaming through the station's skylights. "I have been reviewing the recreational activities you demonstrated yesterday," Silvana announced, settling into her specially designed chair with characteristic grace. "The concept of games continues to perplex me. You expend energy on activities that serve no survival function, produce no tangible benefit, yet you exhibit elevated satisfaction indicators." Marcus chuckled, noting how Silvana's violet eyes immediately focused on his face at the sound. She'd been doing that more frequently lately, studying his expressions with an intensity that went beyond mere scientific curiosity. "Games aren't about survival," he explained, pulling up holographic displays of various human recreational activities. "They're about joy, challenge, social bonding. Watch this." The recording showed children playing in a park, their laughter ringing clear as they chased each other in an elaborate game of tag. Marcus watched Silvana's face as she observed the footage, noting the subtle shift in her skin's luminescence, from cool blues to warmer, more complex hues. The smaller humans appear to derive intense pleasure from proximity to others, Silvana murmured, leaning forward slightly. "Yet there is no logical objective being achieved. They run in circles, make unnecessary physical contact, produce vocalizations that serve no communicative purpose." "They're laughing," Marcus said softly. It's one of the purest expressions of human happiness." "Happiness," Silvana repeated, and Marcus noticed her pronunciation had grown more nuanced, less clinical. "You speak of it as if it were a destination rather than a temporary chemical state." "Maybe it is in a way." Marcus found himself studying her profile as she watched the children play. There was something almost wistful in her posture, though. He knew she'd deny such an interpretation. For humans, happiness isn't just brain chemistry. It's connection, shared experience, the feeling that we're not alone in the universe. Silvana's skin flickered through a rapid spectrum of colors. Something Marcus had learned indicated intense processing of complex information. "Alone," she said finally. "An interesting concept. The ethereal do not experience loneliness. We exist as individual units, self-sufficient and complete. Do you, though?" The question escaped before Marcus could consider its implications. "I mean, if you were truly complete, would you need to study us? Would you be so curious about our inefficient emotions?" For the first time since their meetings began, Silvana appeared genuinely startled. Her crystalline features shifted slightly, and Marcus caught a glimpse of something vulnerable beneath her composed exterior. She began, then stopped, her skin cycling through deeper purples and golds. "My interest is purely academic," but her voice lacked its usual certainty. Their afternoon session took an unexpected turn when Marcus decided to share music. He'd been hesitant to introduce such an abstract concept, but Silvana's growing fascination with human emotional expression seemed to warrant the experiment. The first notes of a classical violin concerto filled the room, and Silvana's reaction was immediate and dramatic. Her entire body went rigid, skin blazing with colors Marcus had never seen before. Brilliant golds and deep crimsons swirling in complex patterns across her translucent surface. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice carrying a tremor of something that sounded remarkably like awe. "Music," Marcus replied, watching her with growing fascination. "Organized sound that creates emotional response. This piece is about loss, longing, the hope of reunion." Silvana's eyes closed, another first, and she sat perfectly still as the music washed over her. Marcus found himself studying the play of light across her features, the way her breathing had synchronized with the rhythm, the almost human vulnerability in her posture. When the piece ended, silence stretched between them. Silvana's eyes opened, slowly, and Marcus was startled to see something that looked remarkably like tears gathering in their violet depths, though he knew ethereals didn't possess tear ducts. "I felt," she began, then stopped, her skin flickering with confusion. "There was a sensation, an experience I lack terminology to describe, as if something within me was responding to patterns that should have no meaning. That's what we call being moved," Marcus said gently. "When something touches your heart, your soul. Hearts are circulatory organs. Souls are mythological constructs, but her protest lacked conviction." That evening, Marcus found Silvana in the station's observation deck staring out at the binary sunset. She'd never deviated from their scheduled meetings before, and her presence in the common area surprised him. "The music continues to generate responses within me," she said without turning around. "I have been analyzing the physiological changes it produced, but the data makes no logical sense. My neural patterns altered in ways that suggest pleasure, yet no survival advantage was gained." Marcus joined her at the viewing port, careful to maintain the respectful distance she preferred. Maybe not everything has to have a survival advantage. Maybe some things are valuable just because they make existence more beautiful. Silvana turned to face him, and in the dying light of the twin suns, her skin seemed to glow with inner warmth. "You speak of beauty as if it were a measurable quality, isn't it?" Marcus gestured toward the sunset, then found his gaze drawn back to her luminescent features. "Some things are beautiful simply because they exist. They don't need justification or purpose." For a long moment they stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the alien sky. Then Silvana spoke, her voice so quiet Marcus almost missed it. "Your species creates beauty even in darkness," she observed. "Your cities at night filled with light and movement and life. We observed them in our initial surveys. Such inefficient use of energy. Yet beautiful," Marcus finished. "Yes," she admitted, and something in her tone made Marcus's breath catch. "Beautiful." Later that night, alone in his quarters, Marcus reviewed the day's recordings and realized something profound was happening. Silvana wasn't just studying human emotion, she was beginning to experience it, and the thought both thrilled and terrified him, because he was beginning to realize that his own feelings toward his alien colleague had evolved far beyond professional interest. He was falling in love with a being who, until recently, hadn't even believed love existed. The change in Silvana became undeniable during their 6th week together. Her skin, once a consistent crystalline blue, now shifted through warm golds and soft greens when Marcus entered the room. Her posture had relaxed from rigid efficiency to something more graceful, more naturally flowing. Most remarkably, she had begun to smile, a hesitant, uncertain expression that transformed her alien features into something breathtakingly beautiful. "I have a confession," she announced during their morning session, her skin flickering with what Marcus had learned indicated nervousness. "I have been experimenting with the emotional responses you've taught me." Marcus set down his data pad, giving her his full attention. "What kind of experiments?" "Last evening, I attempted to recreate the music experience. I found recordings in the station's database and listened to various compositions." Her skin deepened to rich purples and golds. The responses were intense. "I experienced what you might call pleasure, sadness, even something resembling what your literature describes as longing." "And how did that make you feel?" Marcus asked gently. Silvana was quiet for a long moment, her colors shifting through complex patterns. "Alive," she said finally. "For the first time in my existence, I felt truly alive." The admission hung between them, heavy with implications neither quite dared to examine. Their lessons took on a New dimension as Marcus began teaching Silvana not just about human emotions, but how to experience them safely. He showed her comedy and delighted in her first genuine laugh, a sound like crystal bells singing in harmony. He shared poetry, watching her struggle to understand metaphor until suddenly her face would illuminate with comprehension. "This is remarkable," she breathed after he'd read her a sonnet about love. "Your species uses language not just to convey information, but to create emotional landscapes. These words paint pictures in my mind, evoke sensations I have no context for, yet somehow understand." "That's the power of art," Marcus explained, fighting the urge to reach out and touch the golden patterns swirling across her skin. "It bridges the gap between minds, lets us share experiences we've never had." "Is that what this is?" Silvana asked suddenly, her violet eyes meeting his. "Are we sharing experiences we've never had?" The question caught Marcus off guard, mainly because the answer was so obviously yes, and so obviously dangerous. He was sharing emotions with an alien who was supposed to be incapable of reciprocating them, and she was sharing her awakening consciousness with a human who was rapidly losing his professional objectivity. "Maybe we are," he admitted. That evening, Silvana appeared at his quarters outside their scheduled meetings for the second time. She stood in his doorway, her skin cycling through nervous patterns of blue and silver. I find myself wanting to understand more than just human emotions," she said hesitantly. "I want to understand how they are shared between individuals. The recordings show humans engaging in physical contact during emotional exchanges, dancing, embracing, touching hands." Marcus's pulse quickened. "Physical contact isn't necessary for emotional connection, but it can enhance it. Humans are tactile beings. We express affection through touch. Would you—" she began, then stopped, her skin blazing with what he now recognized as embarrassment. "Would you teach me about physical affection?" The request should have triggered every professional boundary Marcus possessed. Instead, he found himself stepping aside to let her enter his quarters, his heart hammering against his ribs. "We could start with something simple," he suggested, his voice carefully neutral. "Like holding hands." Silvana nodded, extending one graceful hand toward him. Marcus took it gently, marveling at the warm, smooth texture of her crystalline skin. The moment their fingers interlaced, Silvana gasped, her entire body lighting up like a constellation. "Oh," she breathed, staring down at their joined hands. "I see. The sensation it's not just physical, is it? There's an emotional resonance, a feeling of connection that transcends the mere contact of skin." "Exactly," Marcus whispered, trying to ignore how right her hand felt in his. They spent the evening exploring simple touches, the brush of fingers across a palm, the weight of a hand on a shoulder, the comfort of sitting close enough to feel each other's warmth. With each contact, Silvana's responses grew more intense, her skin painting aurora-like patterns of color that Marcus found mesmerizing. "Your species bonds through touch," she observed as they sat together on his small couch, her shoulder pressed against his arm. "It creates chemical releases that promote attachment and emotional intimacy." "Among other things," Marcus agreed, acutely aware of her proximity. "Is that what's happening to me?" she asked quietly. "Am I forming an attachment?" Marcus turned to meet her gaze, finding her violet eyes filled with something that looked remarkably like hope and fear in equal measure. "I think you might be. The question is, how do you feel about that?" Silvana's skin shifted to deep golds and soft roses. Colors Marcus had learned indicated happiness and affection. "I think," she said carefully, "that I no longer find the concept of attachment illogical." The next few days brought new experiments in connection. Marcus taught Silvana to dance, her natural grace making her a quick study despite her initial confusion about the purpose of moving together without destination. They shared meals, with Silvana discovering that eating together enhanced both nutrition and social bonding. They took walks under the alien stars, talking about everything and nothing while learning to appreciate companionable silence. Each shared experience seemed to unlock new depths of emotion in Silvana. She began expressing preferences, opinions, that went beyond logical analysis. She started making jokes, awkward at first but increasingly sophisticated as she grasped the nuances of humor. Most remarkably, she began to worry about Marcus's well-being, showing concern when he worked late or skipped meals. "This is troubling," she announced one morning, her skin displaying agitated patterns of red and orange. "I find myself thinking about your welfare even when you are not present. I experience what I believe you would call anxiety when you are late for our meetings. These responses serve no logical purpose, yet I cannot eliminate them." "You care about me," Marcus said simply. "That's what caring feels like." "Care," she repeated, testing the word. "Yes, I believe that is accurate. I care about your well-being, your happiness, your presence in my existence." She paused, her colors shifting to deeper, more complex hues. "Is it possible that I am developing what humans call love?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd been asking himself the same thing for weeks, watching this incredible being transform from clinical observer to someone capable of joy, wonder, and yes, love. And he'd been fighting his own growing feelings, telling himself it was impossible, inappropriate, professional suicide. But looking at Silvana now, her skin glowing with nervous hope as she waited for his answer, Marcus realized that impossible, or not, it was already too late. "I think you might be," he said softly. "And Silvana, I think I might be falling in love with you too." Her response was immediate and overwhelming. Her entire body blazed with brilliant golds and whites, patterns of light racing across her skin like fireworks. For a moment she was so beautiful Marcus could barely breathe. Then reality crashed back, and he remembered exactly how dangerous this conversation was. But Silvana was already moving closer, her luminescent hand reaching for his face with newfound confidence. "Then teach me," she whispered. "Teach me what love feels like to a human." The kiss changed everything. It happened 3 days after their mutual confession, during what should have been a routine evening lesson. Marcus had been explaining the concept of romantic literature when Silvana suddenly stood, her skin cycling through colors he'd never seen before, deep crimsons and shimmering golds that seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. "I want to understand the physical expressions of love your literature describes," she said, moving closer with newfound confidence. "The intimate connections that your species shares." Marcus should have maintained professional distance, should have explained that such contact was beyond the scope of their cultural exchange. Instead, he found himself reaching out to cup her luminescent cheek, marveling at the warmth that radiated from her crystalline skin. "Are you sure?" he whispered. Her answer was to lean into his touch, her eyes falling closed as golden light traced patterns across her features. "I have never been more certain of anything." When their lips met, Silvana's entire body erupted in brilliant light. Not the gentle glows Marcus had grown accustomed to, but blazing aurora patterns that painted the walls in dancing color. She gasped against his mouth, her hands clutching his shoulders as if anchoring herself against a storm of sensation. "Oh," she breathed when they finally parted, her skin still blazing with residual light. "I understand now. Physical intimacy creates emotional resonance, amplifies the connection between individuals. The sensation is overwhelming." "In the best possible way," Marcus agreed, his forehead resting against hers. But their moment of perfect intimacy was shattered by the soft chime of Silvana's communication device. She tensed immediately, her colors shifting to alarmed blues and whites as she activated the message. The holographic projection of Elder Kethvar filled the room, his ancient crystalline features stern with disapproval. Even through the translation interface, his words carried unmistakable authority. "Keeper Silvana, your biological readings have been concerning the council. You will report for evaluation immediately." The projection vanished, leaving them in silence that felt suddenly fragile. "Biological readings?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Silvana's skin had gone pale, almost transparent with fear. All ethereal are monitored for signs of contamination. Emotional development registers as changes in neural chemistry, hormonal fluctuations, altered biorhythms. She turned to him, her eyes wide with something that looked remarkably like panic. They know, Marcus. They know what's happening to me. The evaluation took place in the ethereal council chambers, a crystalline cathedral that amplified every sound and reflected light in dizzying patterns. Marcus wasn't permitted to attend, but he monitored the proceedings through the station's diplomatic channels, his anxiety mounting as hours passed without word. When Silvana finally returned, she was changed. Her colors were muted, her movements once again rigid with controlled precision. Most tellingly, she wouldn't meet his eyes. "What did they say?" Marcus asked gently. "That I have been compromised," she replied, her voice flat and emotionless. "That the human influence has corrupted my neural pathways, introducing inefficient, emotional responses that threaten my capacity for logical reasoning." "And what do you believe?" For the first time since her return, Silvana looked at him directly. Deep in her violet eyes, Marcus caught a flicker of the warmth they'd shared, carefully hidden but still present. "I believe," she said carefully, "that they are afraid of what I've become." The council's verdict came the next morning. Immediate isolation and corrective treatment to eliminate the emotional contamination from Silvana's system. The process, euphemistically called cleansing, would effectively lobotomize her capacity for emotional response, returning her to her original state of pure logical function. "It's not just about me," Silvana explained during what might be their final private moment together. "If other ethereals see that emotional development is possible, that what we eliminated from our genetics can be recovered, it could destabilize our entire civilization. So they'd rather destroy the possibility than explore it," Marcus said bitterly. "Yes." Her skin flickered with suppressed grief. "But Marcus, I need you to understand something. These weeks with you, learning to feel, to love, they haven't made me weaker or less logical. They've made me more complete, more alive than I ever imagined possible." Marcus pulled her into his arms, feeling her melt against him as her colors blazed with desperate intensity. "Then we run," he said fiercely. "We leave this place, find somewhere they can't reach us." "Where?" she asked softly. "I am not human. I cannot survive in your environment indefinitely, and you cannot exist in ethereal space without technological support they would simply revoke." The hopelessness of their situation crashed over Marcus like a wave. Even if they could escape, where would they go? How could they build a life together when they were literally from different worlds? But as he held Silvana close, feeling the warm pulse of light beneath her skin, Marcus realized that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the odds. "Maybe we can't run," he said quietly. "But that doesn't mean we have to surrender. Maybe it's time your people learned that evolution isn't always about elimination. Sometimes it's about integration." Silvana pulled back to study his face, her own features reflecting cautious hope. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe your transformation isn't a contamination to be cleansed," Marcus said, his conviction growing stronger. "Maybe it's the next step in your species' development, and maybe it's time someone showed them the difference." Her smile, when it came, was radiant enough to light the room. "You're proposing we make a stand." "I'm proposing we show them what love can accomplish," Marcus corrected. "Together." The council chamber fell silent as Marcus and Silvana entered hand in hand, her skin blazing with defiant golds and crimsons that painted the crystalline walls in shifting patterns of light. Elder Kethvar and his 6 colleagues sat in judgment, their ancient forms rigid with the cold perfection of emotionless logic. "Dr. Chen," Kethvar's voice resonated through the translation system with Arctic disapproval. "You were not summoned to this proceeding." "I requested his presence," Silvana announced, her voice carrying newfound strength. "If I am to be judged for my transformation, then let it be with complete transparency." Let the council see exactly what your contamination has created. Marcus squeezed her hand, drawing strength from the warm pulse of light that traveled between their joined fingers. They had spent the previous night preparing for this moment, knowing it might be their last together. Keeper Zilvana, Elder Veltara spoke from the left of the tribunal, her crystalline features sharp with concern. Your biological readings indicate unprecedented changes. Neural pathways that have not existed in our species for millennia have developed. Your hormonal balance has shifted to patterns we eliminated from our genetics 3,000 years ago. Yes, Silvana replied simply. I have rediscovered emotions. I have learned to feel joy, wonder, compassion, and love. A ripple of what might have been distress passed through the assembled elders, their skin flickering with alarmed blues and whites. These responses are inefficient, Kethavar declared. They cloud judgment, create irrational attachments, lead to decisions based on desire rather than logic. Our ancestors purged these weaknesses from our genetic code for good reason. Did they? Silvana stepped forward, releasing Marcus's hand to address the council directly. Or did they rob us of capabilities we needed to truly evolve? She gestured, and holographic displays filled the air around them, data Marcus recognized from their weeks of research together. Observe the evidence, Silvana continued. Human civilization, despite their emotional inefficiencies, has achieved technological advancement comparable to our own in a fraction of the time. They create art that transcends mere aesthetics to communicate complex ideas across cultural barriers. They form bonds that enable cooperation on scales we never attempted because we never saw the value in connection. Elder Zephian, the youngest of the council, leaned forward with what Marcus was learning to recognize as curiosity. You suggest that emotional capacity provides evolutionary advantages. I suggest that our ancestors were wrong, Zilvana replied boldly. They saw emotion as weakness because they feared its power. But observe what I have become. With fluid grace, Silvana moved to the center of the chamber. Her skin began to glow, but not with the chaotic patterns of emotional distress the elders expected. Instead, light flowed across her form in complex mathematical patterns, fractals of beauty that seemed to follow some deeper logic. My emotional development has not diminished my intellectual capacity, she explained as the light show continued. It has enhanced it. I now process information on multiple levels simultaneously. Logical analysis combined with intuitive understanding. Rational assessment enhanced by empathetic comprehension. The patterns of light emanating from her skin began to form recognizable shapes. Equations, molecular structures, star charts, but rendered with an artistic beauty that made them as much aesthetic experience as scientific data. This is impossible, Elder Kethvar whispered, his own skin beginning to flicker with what Marcus realized was amazement. Is it? Zilvana asked. Or is this what we were always meant to become? Not purely logical beings, but integrated ones. Creatures, capable of both reason and feeling, analysis and appreciation, thought and love. Marcus watched the council's reactions with growing hope. Several of the elders were exhibiting colors he'd never seen before. Tentative golds and soft greens that suggested the first stirrings of emotional response in beings who had believed themselves incapable of such experiences. Even if what you suggest is true, Elder Veltara said slowly, the risk to our civilization is too great. If all ethereal began developing emotional attachments, our social structure would collapse. Order would give way to chaos, would it? Marcus stepped forward, finding his voice at last. Or would it give way to something better? Zilvana isn't less capable than she was before. She's more complete. She hasn't lost her ability to think logically. She's gained the ability to think compassionately. He moved to stand beside Zilvana, taking her hand once more. At the contact, her skin blazed with warm light that somehow seemed to extend to him, creating a visible bond between them. Love doesn't make you weaker, Marcus continued. It makes you willing to become stronger. For yourself, for the one you love, for the future you want to build together. Silvana has shown me that logic and emotion don't have to be enemies. They can be partners. Partners, Elder Zephian repeated. and Marcus caught the faint flush of gold across his crystalline features. An intriguing concept. Cathvar rose from his seat, his form radiating cold authority. Enough. This contamination threatens the very foundation of our society. Keeper Zilvana will undergo immediate cleansing, and Dr. Chen will return to human space. This experiment ends now. No, Zilvana said quietly, but her voice carried through the chamber like a bell. It doesn't. She squeezed Marcus's hand, and he felt a surge of something, energy, love, determination, flow between them. Around the chamber, other ethereal began to respond, their skin showing the first tentative flickers of color change. You cannot force evolution backward, Zilvana declared. I am not the only one. Others have been watching, learning, feeling the first stirrings of what we lost long ago. The change has already begun. As if to prove her point, young ethereal attendants throughout the chamber began exhibiting increasingly vivid displays of color, nervousness, hope, curiosity, and yes, the first tentative glimmers of what might have been affection as they looked between Marcus and Zilvana. Elder Zephian stood slowly, his skin now showing definite patterns of gold and green. Perhaps, he said carefully, we should consider the possibility that evolution did not end when our ancestors chose logic over emotion. Perhaps it merely paused. One by one, other elders began to show subtle color changes, not the full blazing spectrum of Zilvana's emotional awakening, but enough to suggest that the capacity had never truly been eliminated, only suppressed. Cathvar looked around the chamber with something approaching panic as he realized he was witnessing the beginning of a revolution. This is chaos, he declared. This will destroy everything we have built, or transform it into something we could never have built alone, Zilvana replied gently. She approached the elder, her hand extended in a gesture of peace that Marcus recognized as fundamentally human. Cathvar, you have served our people with dedication and wisdom, but wisdom sometimes means recognizing when change is not just inevitable, but necessary. For a long moment the ancient elder stared at her offered hand. Then slowly, tentatively, he reached out to accept it. The moment their hands touched, Cathvar's entire form shuddered. Colors Marcus had never imagined began to flow across his crystalline skin, deep purples of wonder, soft blues of contemplation, and finally, faint but unmistakable, a warm gold that spoke of acceptance. I remember, he whispered, staring at their joined hands. From before the cleansing, I remember what it felt like to hope. Zilvana smiled, an expression that now seemed as natural to her as breathing. Then let us build a future worth hoping for. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same observation deck where he and Zilvana had first watched the sunset together. But now the view was different. The ethereal settlement below sparkled with new colors, warm lights that spoke of homes instead of mere habitations, gathering places where beings came together not just for efficiency but for companionship. The integration proceeds faster than our most optimistic projections, Zilvana reported, settling beside him with fluid grace. Her skin now maintained a constant warm glow, like captured sunlight, that Marcus had learned was her natural state of contentment. 60% of the population now exhibits some degree of emotional development. Art centers have opened in 7 districts. We've had our first emotionally bonded partnerships. Any regrets? Marcus asked, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. Zilvana leaned into his embrace, her colors shifting to the deep golds and roses he knew meant perfect happiness. Only that it took me so long to understand what love feels like to a human. And what does it feel like? She turned in his arms, her violet eyes bright with an emotion that needed no translation, like coming home to yourself while simultaneously discovering that you are so much more than you ever imagined possible. Marcus kissed her then, tasting starlight and promises, feeling the warm pulse of light that flowed between them, not just love, but hope, partnership, and the infinite potential of 2 worlds learning to become one. Around them, The binary sun set in spectacular fashion, painting the sky in colors that rivaled even Zilvana's most brilliant emotional displays. And in the settlement below, two species that had once seemed impossibly different continued the patient work of building a future together. One heart, one choice, one moment of connection at a time.